What's up everyone, Darcblade here bringing you another Mass Effect 3 multiplayer class guide. In this episode we're going to be taking a look at the last Asari character in the game, the Asari Huntress infiltrator. She, as with all Asari, is a very powerful biotic character, even though she is an infiltrator class. Her biotics combined with tactical cloak give her some very high damage potential. She is a master dot class, a damage over time class, with the option of dishing out direct biotic damage thanks to her biotic explosions, and this backed up with strong weapons can make her a very high damage dealing class. Now, as with all my characters, I spec my Asari Huntress for the harder difficulties in the game. I start out by maxing out Tactical Cloak, the signature ability for all infiltrators. However, the Asari Huntress has aspects of her Tactical Cloak that differ from the other races. Firstly, I put points into power damage over bonus power. Both of these options are good for the Asari Huntress, but I went with power damage as it can make your other abilities that much more powerful. If you wanted to focus solely on creating and setting off biotic explosions, then bonus power might be the better option. But if you use the Asari Huntress like I am, combining her weapons and biotics, then increasing the damage of your other abilities to increase the dot damage is more beneficial. Next, I take recharge speed over melee damage. There is a melee build for the Asari Huntress, but it doesn't shine well on gold or above. And lastly, I put points into damage over duration. Next, I max out Dark Channel. I put points into Pierce over damage. Pierce gives extra added damage that is really useful against boss type characters, Banshees, Atlases, so on and so forth. Non-armoured opponents are generally easier and quickly dealt with by other means than Dark Channel, and in all honesty, this makes Pierce a better option in my opinion. Next, I put points into Slow. The recharge for Dark Channel is already fast and sometimes irrelevant if used whilst in Tactical Cloak, thus making Slow the better option here. Lastly, I put points into damage over duration. This is because I want Dark Channel's dot to be doing a lot of damage, but also because you want to refresh Dark Channel every now and again on opponents to create additional biotic explosions. Lastly, I max out Warp, one of my favourite biotic abilities. I max it out putting points into Pierce over recharge speed. I use a light loadout with the Asari Huntress already, and Tactical Cloak can potentially rule out the Warp cooldown. Anyway, Pierce will mean that the damage to armoured opponents is increased. Next, I put points into Expose over lasted damage. Expose adds another damaging debuff to opponents, which is helpful for future damage to these targets. Lastly, I put points into Detonate, making your biotic explosions a lot more stronger. As you can see, Warp is not used for a damaging ability as such, but a more debuffing ability, making your other abilities and weapons that much more potent. As for the passives, these are down to personal preference, but alas we don't have many points left to put into these. With Asari Huntress I went up to rank 5, putting points into power damage over headshot and damage and capacity over weapon damage. The rest of the points I put into fitness for a little bit of extra health and shields. You can skip out fitness altogether if you would prefer to max out Asari Huntress, but then you really will have to rely on Tactical Cloak for your protection. With a few points into fitness, I felt I had a little bit more of a safety net when it comes to taking damage. As for weaponry, I went with a light shotgun, although any light loadout will do. Take a weapon you are good with and that has a high level, as this will add to your damage output. As for your gear slot, go with either something to increase your power damage, weapon damage, or failing that, something to increase your shields for some added defense. Anyway, let's get into the heart of the episode and talk a bit more about the Asari Huntress moves and abilities. Her first ability is Tactical Cloak, the signature move for all infiltrators. Tactical Cloak allows the Asari Huntress to cloak herself and become invisible. Whilst invisible and shortly after breaking cloak, she will gain massive damage bonus. With the Asari Huntress though, this is only really applied to her power damage and melee damage, rather than her weapon damage. The damage bonus for the Asari Huntress is actually slightly higher than non-Asari infiltrators in the game's multiplayer. Tactical Cloak comes with numerous pros on top of the invisibility and damage bonus. It can be used to take objectives in relative safety, can be used to break aggro from enemies, breaking their line of sight, unless you're actually playing a solo match. In these cases, the enemy still tends to see you. These are great defensive aspects of Tactical Cloak, and if used right, means that you don't have to worry too much about having little points in the fitness tree. Tactical Cloak can also come in handy when you're trying to get the drop on enemies, giving you a great opportunity to attack their flanks or take out weaker but more tactically important targets such as engineers or marauders. The cooldown timer with Tactical Cloak can be an issue sometimes. If you stay cloaked for the full length of the cloak, then you will have a fairly long cooldown timer. But if you do break cloak by attacking right away, then the cooldown timer will be a lot less, up to a minimum of 3 seconds. Also, this cooldown timer will overwrite any other ability you used whilst cloaked. So if you use Dark Channel or Warp, the cooldown timer from these abilities won't be taken into account, but instead you'll occur the cooldown timer of Tactical Cloak. With the Asari Huntress, you always want to break your cloak with one of your abilities rather than your weaponry. By using your abilities though, that means that your enemy will take a debuff, making them weaker to your weaponry before you start firing. Normally other infiltrators will gain that extra damage debuff to their weapons after they start firing for a brief second or two after breaking cloak, but unfortunately this doesn't really apply to the Asari Huntress. Overall, there are really not many downsides to Tactical Cloak that is worth pointing out. It's a great ability and very handy. The second ability available to the Asari Huntress is Dark Channel. With Dark Channel, the Asari Huntress will fire a non-projectile biotic plague at opponents. This will persistently damage opponents in the biotic field, making a very nice dot ability, a damage over time ability. After the target is killed, the Dark Channel will transfer to the next opponent within range. This could potentially mean that you only need to cast the ability once and have it affect multiple opponents. Dark Channel can also be used to set up biotic explosions. However, it cannot be used to set off biotic explosions. A biotic explosion is where you hit a target with a biotic move and then follow it up with a second different biotic ability. With the Asari Huntress, biotic explosions can be set up by both Dark Channel and Warp, but can only be set off by Warp. Anyway, once hit with a second biotic ability, a biotic explosion is created, dealing extra damage to the target as well as damaging anyone else around the original target here. The damage from biotic explosions is strong, especially with maxed out abilities. However, with the Asari Huntress, biotic explosions come in best when there are multiple targets around. Sometimes on individual targets, it's best to let the dots do their work. That being said, you should still want to refresh Dark Channel from time to time. Maybe not spam it as much, but from time to time. I should also say that when Dark Channel jumps to a new target, this new target will also be primed for a new biotic explosion. I should also add that detonating a biotic explosion set up by Dark Channel does not remove its dot. Thanks to the Tactical Cloak damage bonus, Dark Channel can be very powerful. You can potentially just dot up a Banshee and let the dot kill them. Okay, it might take a second cast of Dark Channel, but in that time you can just kite the Banshee around the map and have your Dark Channel work them down. Dark Channel on the Asari Huntress is one of the best damage over time abilities in the game, really. The third and final ability available to the Asari Huntress is Warp, one of my favourite biotic abilities in the game. A lot of classes have this move, so I may be repeating myself a little here. The main appeal for Warp to me is its utility aspect, as it is able to debuff enemies nicely, making your weapons and other abilities more effective. With Warp, the Asari Huntress will fire a biotic projectile at opponents. The projectile will bend too, meaning if aimed right, can hit enemies taking cover behind walls or other sorts of cover. Warp will rip opponents apart at a molecular level, dealing them damage. This will leave a damage over time effect on them too. On top of this, it will stop enemies from regenerating their health, and it will also weaken opponents who have armor, making them take more damage. Warp is also rather effective against enemies who have barriers. The debuffing effect of Warp can be increased more so with putting points into the Warp tree. Warp can also be used to both set up and set off biotic explosions, which I just talked about when I was talking about Dark Channel. I should add that when Warp is used in the creation or activation of a biotic explosion, then the biotic explosion is stronger, thanks to having points in detonate in the Warp tree. Warp can also be used to set off tech combos if you have teammates who use tech moves. Warp does not have a long duration, so it is worth casting Warp often to keep up the dot and the debuff on opponents. Now, like Dark Channel, casting Warp when you have Tactical Cloak active will greatly increase the power of this ability. And if you combine this with the fact that both the dots of Dark Channel and Warp stack, means that the damage over time potential of the Asari Huntress is through the roof. You really want to be using Tactical Cloak before casting or doing any offensive moves with this class. As for the passive abilities, like I said at the start of this video, it's down to your own personal preference. I went up to rank 5 in Asari Huntress as I wanted to get increased power damage, making my dots even more powerful. If you wanted, you could go for headshot and weapon damage, but as the Asari Huntress Tactical Cloak doesn't benefit weapons, I would stay with power damage. As for fitness, some players like to skip out and rely on the Tactical Cloak for the defense, but like I said, I like to have a safety net and have a tiny bit of extra health and shields. With weapons, you want to keep a light loadout. As for the racial abilities, the Asari Huntress is the same as the other Asari. Her health and shields are on the low side, being the same as humans. She has a wonderful dodge mechanic though, a biotic dash that allows her to almost teleport out the way of incoming fire. However, this costs a small portion of her shields to do so. As for melee, her light melee is nothing to get excited about, but her heavy melee is a biotic heavy blast. The Asari Huntress will unleash an AoE biotic blast around her, staggering most opponents. But this will leave her slightly vulnerable afterwards. This is thanks to the heavy biotic blast's animation. So if you do want to use the heavy biotic blast, go careful, use it wisely, or maybe when you want to show off. Overall, the Asari Huntress is a rare class in my opinion. She is one of the only biotic based infiltrators in the game. She is a master damage over time class. Her abilities favour dot playstyle over direct damage. However, direct damage can be gained thanks to her ability to create and set off her own biotic explosions. Add to this her weapon damage means that she is a very versatile damage dealing class, and I personally love dot classes, making this one incredibly fun for me to play. Anyway, I've been Darcblade, bringing you my Mass Effect 3 multiplayer class guide to the Asari Huntress. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.